All right, good morning, good day, good afternoon, depending on where you're coming from. Our panelists are coming to us from 6 p.m. in Europe, 9 a.m. on the West Coast, and 4 a.m. in New Zealand. God bless them. This is Lars Leicht from the Somm Journal, welcoming everybody to our first edition of Winery Close-Ups, our new educational webinar series. Today, we're going to be talking about Pinot Noir, aspects from delicacy to durability. This is done in conjunction with the Somm Journal and Somm Foundation. And first and foremost, we have Meredith May, publisher and editor-in-chief of the Somm Journal, to say a quick word about one of our other sponsors as well. Good morning, Meredith.
Good morning. I am so excited to take a trip around the world today to see all these great Pinot Noir vineyard sites close up. And we're so proud of our partners, National Geographic and National Geographic Books. And we've got the new Sotheby's Encyclopedia here. We're going to give away 2 of those today as part of our scholarship program. So thank you all, and we'll have a great time, believe me.
No doubt. Thanks, Meredith. I'm glad you got your post-breakfast workout in too. Those books weigh a little bit as well. So a couple of rules, a couple of housekeeping issues to cover on. First of all, we are live on Facebook. Second of all, this is being recorded. So it will be available on the sommjournal.com website, as well as our YouTube page. And the recap, an editorial recap of feature will be written in the August-September Somm Journal. So
Right.
Remember to tune in for that. Thanks, Mayor. And as Meredith alluded to a little bit in our collaboration with Somm Foundation, we also have a little bit of incentive for you today to get a hold of one of those heavy books, heavy and incredible wealth of value to them. So I'd like to introduce Lynn Fletcher from Somm Foundation to tell us a little bit about how you might be able to get into the contest for one of those. Good morning, Lynn.
Good morning. So welcome, everybody. Thank you so much to the Somm Journal and all our panelists and wineries. We really appreciate the chance to be a part of this great series. We're really excited about it. So first off, we are going to be giving away 8 people get access to Somm Geo for the next year from a random drawing we're going to be doing for all of you participating today. So we'll notify you within the next 2 days if you've been selected as one of those lucky people. And then if you want to participate in the competition, we're doing an essay contest for a $400 scholarship. We're going to be sending out an email within the next 2 days to all of you attending today with the instructions and the prompt for the essay. You'll have until Monday night at midnight Pacific time to submit your response, and then we'll probably take about a week to get back with the winners, and those will be announced by the 28th at the latest. But the lucky winners will, the first 2 scorers will receive a copy of the new Sotheby's Wine Encyclopedia that you just saw from Meredith, and first place will get a scholarship for $400. So pay close attention, and we wish you luck.
Fantastic. Thank you, Lynn. So we've got a great panel lined up for you today, as I said, coming from a few different parts of the world and some really exciting Pinot terroirs. In my experience, I have to tell you, every winemaker that I've met that has either gray hair or no hair blames it on Pinot Noir. I don't know if this panel reflects that or all. I'll let you judge them one-on-one, and I don't have to ask them that question. I'm very fortunate today to have 2 fantastic people helping drive this. So first and foremost is Andrea Robinson, who is, I almost needs no introduction. Fantastic guide for all things wine to both the trade and the consumer through her Andrea Wine website, is doing some wonderful education, always has been and always will be. So welcome, Andrea. Great to have you here. And also Greg Van Wagner, a sommelier from wine director at Jimmy's in Aspen. He's developed the Somm Geo program, which I always like to say is sort of like Google Earth meets the wine world. It's a fantastic program. Lynn mentioned to us that some of our winners will have the chance to access it. Everybody can see it through sommfoundation.com. And Greg is going to give us a little tease, a little snippet, and use the tool to walk us around Burgundy today. So Andrea and Greg, please take it away. Greg, you want to start by showing us where we are on planet Earth?
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Lars. And everybody, it's really amazing to be here. Good morning, and present the Somm Geo tour for this event. For those of you at home, we're also going to put the link to this tour in the chat box, so you can play along, and each screen is totally interactive, so you can explore the wine regions as you'd like. And it's an example of a much larger platform that's available to donors to the Somm Foundation that includes all the world's wine regions and downloadable maps and quite a bit of wine theory. But let's check out some Pinot Noir vineyards. So today we'll mainly be working from the origins of Pinot Noir in Burgundy towards the west and the south. So going through Oregon and California and New Zealand. But we'll start kind of in the origins, right in France. Burgundy is on that eastern shelf of France, where we have, you know, really a full line of classic wine regions, going from Champagne through the Côte d'Or, where we are now, the Northern Rhone, Beaujolais, Southern Rhone. It's really a truly amazing place. But we're in the Côte d'Or right now, the classic origins of Burgundy, where we have the village appellations lining this limestone escarpment. Beaune itself, it's a commercial center and very important village appellation in its own right. It has 42 premier crus that produce both red and white wines. And the Louis Jadot, this Clos d'Ursule, I believe this is the very original parcel of the house, wholly owned since 1826. And starting off in Burgundy is great. It kind of puts everything in context, and the other regions, you know, really can decide, okay, what do we want to keep? What do we want to be unique to us? And what do we want to kind of create for our own wine region? Now back to Andrea. I'm excited to hear more.
Fantastic. Thanks, Greg and Lars and Meredith and Somm Foundation. This is obviously super exciting. The reason we're talking about Pinot Noir in the context of all of these different wine regions is because, as everybody who knows and loves the grape will regularly say, Pinot Noir is a place that broadcasts its site or its terroir more than any other. And so today we have really some of the jewels in the crown of the Pinot Noir tiara of greatness, with all of the different regions that we're going to focus on today, and the artisans who are the drivers of basically escorting the particularities and the special aspects of their site into the glass. And Greg, to your point about the limestone in Burgundy, that's where we start. We all know that Pinot Noir sort of loves a cool climate. That's a huge aspect of it. And certainly Burgundy brings us that with its cool continental climate, warm summers, but very cold winters, and lower average temperatures than at least some of the other regions we'll be featuring. But really, that's all, just about all that these regions have in common, with a couple of exceptions. And so you're going to see Pinot Noir expressions from across soil types and across climates, starting, of course, with the mothership. We're right here in Burgundy with Louis Jadot's Beaune Clos d'Ursule. We've got Frédéric Barnier, the winemaker, and we're going to talk about, Frédéric, I'm going to ask you to start. Just tell us in particular about the Beaune Clos d'Ursule, and I'll probably throw up a couple of images as you're talking about its particular aspects, that what's unique to the Beaune Clos d'Ursule, and what is that bringing to the glass?
Okay. Hi, everyone. Just I'll make probably a little back to the Pinot Noir first, to introduce, of course, a special place, which is Burgundy, because, as you know, Pinot Noir is born probably not far from here. But when, we don't know exactly. So that's something which is still mysterious a little bit, exactly when and where. So that's something which is sometimes difficult to imagine, because today Pinot Noir has a strong, I would say, influence here in Burgundy, of course. But again, we don't know exactly from where and when it appears here in Burgundy. So we are very lucky, because, of course, it has made what is Burgundy today. And if we are using it in Burgundy, it's because it has something very specific. It's a fragile grape variety. It's a grape variety which is very sensitive. And here in Burgundy, we have many places, many types of soils, many types of, I would say, situations, locations, exposures. So, of course, if we are using a grape variety which is probably too strong to reveal that, we will never see the differences between a Volnay and a Pommard, and of course a Beaune. So we need a very fragile, a very sensitive grape variety to reveal that. And Pinot Noir has such, I would say, capacity reveal that, because the yield, the weather, the soil, the nature of soil, the people who are farming influence slightly the result of what we will have thanks to Pinot Noir. Because of course, in Burgundy, we are always talking about the place, the vineyards, the name of the wine. We have probably a part of the greatest wines we are producing in the world, but honestly, we are nothing without a good vegetal. So Pinot Noir, it's really what makes the place so special, and that's really, it is, I would say, the revelation of the place. So if we are talking a little about Clos des Ursules, of course, it's one of the first plots we have bought in Burgundy. I mean, when the Jadot family arrived from Belgium. So it's really the heart of Maison Louis Jadot. It's really our DNA. One of the first, I would say, a place for us discovered by the Jadot family. And that's really a special, I would say, bone. Why? Because again, in Burgundy, a good wine, it's not only a location, it's not only a question of geology, it's a question of history, it's a question of what have made people generation after generation in such place. And here, it's a vineyard which has been made by some of the monks. Again, the monks were very, very important a few centuries ago in Burgundy. And we have kept, in fact, the transparency, the purity of the place century after century, because it has been always the same place, farm, and with his name, Clos des Ursules. So it's a monopoly. We are alone to produce it. We are alone to farm it. And it's exactly on the middle of the slope. So it's not a strong slope, a steep slope, but very gentle slope. With a mix of clay and limestone, as you said before, but as everywhere in Burgundy. But again, on the middle of the slope, so it's a good location because we have enough water, but not too much water. So the soil is has a certain generosity, but not too much, because of course, here in Burgundy, we need at a certain way to suffer a little to make something good. We need to sometimes, to have a little difficulties to arrive to a nice level of quality. So it's exactly why this Clos des Ursules is so special, because you have not exactly something not too rich, not too easy to make. So that's why it's a so special wine.
Frederick, I noticed that in the image of the soil, there's a lot of white rocks, which I guess at least have some limestone component. There's also a lot of red to the actual dirt. Is this an iron-rich part of Burgundy as well?
Yeah, as you know, Burgundy, it's always a mix of limestone, which is most of the time, the rocks, this white stone. So it's the small stones you see on the soil, because in fact, it's coming from the bedrock. And it's coming up year after year through the work we do on the soil with the labor, for example. And of course, there is some earth, some clay, which is most of the time a little bit more darker or brown, or as you say, a little bit red, because you have some iron sometimes, and it's oxidized on the surface, and it gives this special, I would say, brown or orange color on the surface. But here in Clos des Ursules, we have a lot of water down the soil, so it's quite rich on clay, which is I would say probably a little bit better for the Pinot Noir. When it's more stony, it's most of time I would say a good location for Chardonnay. For example, in Chassagne-Montrachet, Puligny-Montrachet, or on the hill of Corton-Charlemagne, we have this stone which is more limestone. So it's really better. It's working better with Chardonnay. But here in Clos des Ursules, it's a little bit more rich in clay.
So I'm getting a lot of beautiful like red fruit. It's very elegant, red currants and red cherries, and there's also a little bit of a sanguine, almost like a wet metal, like you bit your tongue and you get that like slight bit of a bloody taste. It's very, very pointed and expressive. What are you doing in the winemaking and or the farming that's really focused on bringing the particularity of this wine into the glass?
Yeah, as we said before, in Burgundy we have to be transparent. We have to try to stay pure. What it means, it doesn't mean that we do nothing. We have to work hard in the vineyard to make good fruits. Of course, most of the way is in the vineyard because we need good fruits to make a good wine. So farming, of course, today it's an organic farming. In past, it was farming practices which were a little bit different because, again, Burgundy has changed since centuries and centuries. But today, the only way to reveal and to be transparent and to be loyal to the place is really to respect the fruits. So the organic, it's the minimum to do. And in terms of winemaking, it's not so much doing a lot, it's more to be behind the wine. So it's really to respect the quality of the fruit. So it's simple, picking by hand, of course, sorting a little the fruit. In 18, the wine you are tasting tonight, we had nothing to sort out. The fruits were just perfect. So we have just distames because we have decided to distames. We keep only the berries. And then it's a long process of maceration and fermentation with some pigeage, punching the cap to extract the tannins, the color, and quite, I would say, nothing to add because everything is in the fruit. So that's really to do less as possible, but the right thing at the good moment. That's it. And then, of course, it's a long process of aging in cask. Not only in new oak cask, so it's a mix with old cask, but it's really long. It's 18 months, sometimes a little bit longer. Again, it's really to give the time to the wine. The time, it's something today we are losing a little. We are doing things very, very fast, very quick. So we are trying to give all the time it needs to the wine. So here, the wine is, I would say, command. It's not us. We don't decide when it's time to bottle or to rack. It's really the wine which decide year after year. So a vintage is not exactly the same wine from a vintage to another vintage.
Do you vinify each of the different parcels slightly differently? And I'm showing an image right now of, we'll call it your office, but this is the cuverie. And you have both stainless and oak open top casks, and I'm wondering if this wine gets fermented in the wood or the stainless, and is it treated differently from other red parcels?
Yeah, well, the choice of the tank depends, of course, of the quantity we are picking because we have different size of tanks. But that's true that we have probably a better confidence to the oak tank to keep a certain to give some time to a maceration because stainless steel tank, it exchanges a little bit quicker in terms of temperature, so the fermentation don't last the same time as in an oak tank. So if we are, I would say, working on our greatest appellations, most of the time we are using the oak tank because we have a better confidence and it gives again more time to the maceration. But yeah, you know, the wine after 4 weeks are not so different between an oak tank and a stainless steel tank. It's a slight difference, a small difference. And after you have 15 months, 18 months of aging. So that's, and after, of course, many years of aging in bottle before to drink it. So it's not, I would say, the biggest choice you have to make choosing the tank.
Well, beautiful purity and elegance. It's a fantastic wine. And I know 18 was a great vintage. And so you just basically had to sit back and not mess with Mother Nature. But you did an amazing job. It's beautiful. Thank you so much. Greg, I'm going to turn it back over to you because we are going to do some pond hopping and head on over to North America.
Yeah, absolutely. So following our Pinot Noir journey to the west, we have the Willamette Valley, which you can see extending down to the south of Portland, all the way to Eugene, and tucked in between the coastal mountains and the Cascades, both of which help to protect the area. I mean, a number of different sub-AVAs. The Willamette has really become a specialist of Pinot Noir, with over 70% of the valley's plantings devoted to the grape. The Chardonnay they produce there is also a favorite. And now heading up to Yamhill Carlton District, really one of the most important and classic sub-AVAs of the Willamette, where they have ancient marine sediment soils. And the whole appellation sits tucked into the base of the coast mountains. So it creates a rain shadow effect across the appellation. Here we have a really beautiful site to see, Willackenzie Estate, where they're able to do a number of different single vineyard bottlings, but all sourced from this one 420-acre home estate. And I'm excited to hear a little bit more about each.
Fantastic. Thanks, Greg. So, so we've got Eric Kramer from Willackenzies, the winemaker, and I'm going to just ask you to bring us to Willamette Valley first and foremost, because it's completely different from Burgundy where we were. And other than, Greg, you said marine deposits, and that part's similar, but in terms of the actual makeup, I think it's quite a bit different. And then let's drill down to the Willackenzie Estate in the Yamhill Carlton AVA, and in particularly what you're getting and what you're looking for and when it comes to Pinot Noir.
Thank you, Andrea. And gosh, being a National Geographic lover for as long as I can remember, I was so excited when I heard about this. So this is absolutely cool, and that Somm Geo tool is amazing. Yes. So we don't have the same kind of time horizon here in the Willamette Valley that, say, we were speaking about and hearing from Frederic. So first Pinot planted here largely back in 1967 in the Dundee Hills. So we're in the Yamhill Carlton district. So I've been in the Willamette Valley for about 16 years now, and there are some things that kind of resonate with me, I guess, from a geographic perspective in terms of what helps to define the region and the Pinot Noir expressions that we see. Some of that simply boils down to this climatic shift that we see on an annual basis between maritime and Mediterranean. We're just kind of moving into that Mediterranean part of the growing season where it's a little bit drier. I would say we're transitioning, so we see rainfall kind of here and there with occasional sun breaks. But the summer here in the Willamette Valley, for the vast majority of the growing season, when we actually have canopy in the vineyards, is quite dry, and a typical day maybe in the mid 70s with low relative humidity, down around 20 to 30%. Long days. We're about 45 degrees north latitude here in the Willamette Valley. So long, moderate days with low humidity. And it cools off a fair bit at night because of that low humidity. Down to, I would say, kind of mid to upper 50s is typical. And then we'll transition back to maritime. So people oftentimes will say, doesn't it rain a lot in Oregon? And it does, but that's confined to a specific time of year. Sometimes that rainy season really can start for us in the very middle of harvest. And so we do deal with challenging vintages here in the Willamette Valley, but that's okay. We've learned to live with it and appreciate it. And I think it makes us better wine growers as a result. And the rainy season really gets going in, say, November and runs through kind of March, April. So that's important. The soils here, so in Pinot Noir is typically planted on a clay-based soil. And if I were to speak about dominant soil groups, I would be speaking about something of either volcanic origin, it's a very tectonically active area here in the Willamette Valley, or sedimentary origin, but largely clay-based soils. And that clay has really terrific water holding capacity. So between the combination of rainfall in the maritime part of the year, the dry summer, which is relatively low disease pressure, and soils that have good water holding capacity, and then moderate temperatures with long days, I would say we have an environment that's just set up for not just viticultural success, but I mean, it's the agricultural scene here in the Willamette Valley is pretty terrific. And the fruits and the vegetables here are all very good. And Pinot Noir and Chardonnay happen to fall into that, into that category.
Yes, we can throw in truffles as well, right? You've kind of got it all there. And I guess a few Burgundians have have found the allure of Willamette Valley for Pinot Noir as well. Take us into the estate, and as you're talking about it, I'm going to show an image that gives the vineyard block, so you can kind of give us a sense for what you have there and how you're making the most of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So Willikenzie Estate, incidentally, was founded by a gentleman from Burgundy named Bernard Lacroute. And most of the planting here at Willikenzie Estate was done between 1992 and 1996. So it's a 400 plus acre estate where we have just under 100 acres under vine. The vast majority of that happens to be planted to Pinot Noir. You can see that beautiful kind of tapestry of Burgundy looking blocks. And one of the things that I love so very much about the estate is this topographical kind of diversity that we have that's defined by a number of different ridge lines and draws. We have a couple of different faults running through the property, varying aspects and exposures and soil depths. And with all of that, we have a multitude of expressions of Pinot Noir. I mean, so you had mentioned about how Pinot Noir does such a great job expressing its sense of place. And I would say quintessential Yamhill Carlton and Willikenzie Pinot Noir is really about this wine that kind of moves between red and dark fruit, but there's this very noticeable kind of savory, sometimes almost briny kind of expression that it can have. And texturally, the wines can be, you know, energetic and powerful. But within the Willikenzie Estate, because we have so much diversity there, we have another kind of level of depth of expression there. So if you go, you know, if you were to, you know, transition back to that map there for just a moment,
yeah.
Say on the northern side of the estate, we can have a Pinot Noir that is perhaps over in the Leicht zip code, a Pinot Noir that is perhaps a little bit more floral and demure, or with our Emery Pinot Noir, something that is a bit more kind of rich and brooding and expansive. But I think for me, you know, working as a Pinot Noir winemaker, it's so fascinating seeing how it does such a very good job expressing its sense of place, and it's absolutely cool.
So then jumping into the winery, and I think because Frederick mentioned this as well about really, because of that diversity, keeping part blocks and even subsets of blocks separate. That's a big commitment. How are you guys handling, because you've got this diversity, how are you managing to not dissipate it? You obviously have to ferment things separately, and that's a big deal.
It is a big deal, and and it's important for getting a chance to really know and understand all these little idiosyncratic personalities that are spread across the estate. So what isn't necessarily reflected in that image is we have better than 40 individual parcels of Pinot Noir with different plant material, clone and rootstock combinations. And so we made a pretty big capital investment at Willikenzie Estate a few years ago to essentially create an infrastructural arm of the vineyard. What does that mean? We have essentially one fermenter for every parcel based on what we might anticipate with respect to yield. And I can't tell you what a big deal that really is for us to get a chance to know and understand each little bit and piece of the estate and optimize a lot of decisions along the way. And with respect to handling in the winery, much like Frederic had mentioned, it's a pretty hands-off approach so that we can allow the Pinot Noir to really express itself and that sense of place so very clearly. But to have the infrastructures that can support that kind of process is pretty critical to what we're doing here at Willikenzie.
So with that in mind, because Frederick mentioned destemming for at least for that parcel, where are you with that? I know that's a thing that a lot of Pinot Noir producers are talking about playing with and changing. Are you using any whole bunch? What are you doing?
Yeah, so everything is handpicked on the winery, brought into the processing line. It's destemming. I would say we may experiment with whole cluster from time to time, but generally speaking, it's largely 100% destemmed. I think one of the things that at least in my opinion, the Pinot expression off of Willikenzie can be somewhat nervous and lean into rusticity. So being mindful of that, that sense of the estate's expression, that doesn't always necessarily, align perfectly with whole bunch. So it really depends on the vintage. Yeah.
Yeah, I get this incredible, like a spent campfire, that smokiness that's left over. It's a little bit of a char, which I associate with Willamette Valley Pinot Noir, and that's really a generalization because there's plenty that don't have it, but I'm definitely getting that. If you were to describe sort of some of the characteristics for the style that you're going for, just in terms of taste, aroma, what are some of the markers that you're trying to accomplish?
Yeah, so aromatically, it's really about letting the estate express itself. This is a 2018, so I would say it's a more opulent expression of Pinot Noir from the Willamette Valley, where for me as a wine grower, winemaker, I don't spend a lot of time thinking about aroma very much, because they're all fruits, and if they smell good, then they smell lovely. It's really about texture. So for me, it's about creating something that offers almost an ethereal feel on the palate if it can, and something that basically enters with finesse and balance and has some energy and some really great length. But really, it's just purity, clarity, sense of place.
Love what you said about texture, and it's absolutely fantastic. I often call Pinot Noir satin pajamas for your palate, and coming from Napa and the comparison to Napa Cabernet, I say maybe it's the velvet spa robe for your palate. So thank you for the satin PJs. That's I love what you said about texture, and that's really, I'm sure, what a lot of people, especially vintners, are thinking when they're thinking about trying to make the most of Pinot Noir, because that ethereal elegance is perfect. So thank you so much. We are gonna jump on now to our next destination. And Greg, I think we're headed south to Mendocino County, Anderson Valley. Take us there.
Absolutely. So we are now in California, heading just a little bit south, where we have a number of top wine regions that see a lot of success with Pinot Noir. And every region has quite a bit of other unique factors to it, but one common thread that you see is really the importance of the great air conditioner of California wine regions, right? The Pacific Ocean. So the proximity to that oceanic influence makes a huge deal. Typically those areas that are closer see cooler temperatures, more fog, and are definitely more suited towards Burgundy varieties. And then you start to see the warmer weather varieties as you move further inland. But in the far north in Mendocino, in particularly Anderson Valley, really tends towards Burgundy grapes. It's region 1 ranking on the Winkler scale, has huge diurnal temperature shifts day to night. And they've definitely really embraced organic and biodynamic viticulture up here. I think that's well represented in the DAC vineyard by Domaine Anderson, where it's completely organic and biodynamically farmed. And with that, take it away.
Fantastic. Thank you. Wow. That's a very, very beautiful image there. We're going to be talking to right now Darren Lowe. Darren, I'm going to turn it over to you to just orient us. Greg did a great job of pointing out the coolness there. This is basically almost Champagne weather, Champagne region weather in Anderson Valley where you are. So orient us to this particular site, and then we'll go from there. Welcome.
Okay, thank you, Andrea. Hi, everyone. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned Champagne, because we do have our origins in the Anderson Valley. In the 80s, Maison Louis Roederer, from Reims in France, the Champagne house, came over to California to look for some land to grow Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. So we take a page out of the continental growing of the Pinot Noir in Europe, but make it into Champagne. That history and coming over here to the Anderson Valley, they found this little valley, which is it's quite small comparatively to the other northern California valleys that grow wine. It's only 2,500 acres planted, comparatively to, there's a little, compared to like Dundee Hills, which is 6,500, and Oregon, Russian River, which is about 15,000 acres. So we're quite small, but you're right. The proximity to the ocean, we're about 20 miles away, and we get this really consistent cooling effect from the ocean in terms of wind and fog. And we always, every afternoon, we get the wind and fog coming from the northwest, and it goes up the valley and retreats from inland. So the closer you are to the ocean, which we call the deep end of the Anderson Valley, is cooler and typically has like a longer growing season because the nights get really cool. Like the differences between the daytime temperatures in the summer are 90 degrees versus 50 degrees at night. So yeah, that's a nice graphic. So the wind comes and the fog to and from the ocean. Boonville, which is our warmest site, the Walraven Vineyard, it's our warmest site. So the grapes that come from the ones that come from this region is typically softer, a little more ripe. Whereas if you go further down the valley, the Pinot Vineyard is typically bigger, feel a little, because it's got the longer hang time. The tannins are typically more robust than the softer Walraven Vineyard.
When you talk about hang time differences, like give us a range, like what would be the outside if like this one's hanging, a week longer or 4 days or 10 days, or what is it?
It's about 10 to 14 days. Wow. So it's and like I said, that diurnal shift is a little bit more marked the closer you get to the ocean. So closer at the deep end. So that really, in our little valley, we're able to have a lot of expressive sites. And so Greg mentioned our farming. And so that first and foremost, to be able to express site, we feel that the organic and then also using biodynamic practices really help us to define the terroir and the site. And we do take a page out of we're French based, so we have that type of old world thinking, making and growing new world wines. And so it's very, it's important to us to have that purity of texture. Eric mentioned that. And that to me, since Pinot Noir is like the most, or a very transparent grape, you really want that kind of fine texture, that snappy acidity, that kind of crisp and clean. But then you also get like the, bright fruit, the vibrancy, and I think in Anderson Valley, because of the, our warm days, in California, we get plenty of sun. In the winemaking, it's really about kind of holding back and kind of being very careful with your choices you make and extraction levels. So I really do I get as much concentration as I want. So the trick is really trying to kind of ride that fine line between, the texture where, a perfect wine would be like, the balance between weightlessness and concentration, between, you can have that transparency, but also that density as well. And so that's a beautiful Pinot Noir. And we can get that in the Anderson Valley.
Yeah, there's this real, there's a real slip on the palate to it, it's a very, very, it's almost like the tannins have the edges are buffed off and it's very, very silky. This is the first one where I'm also getting a little bit of a tea quality and a little bit of a gaminess, which is really seductive. What are you doing in winemaking? I know you said you're kind of riding the line, but can you get a little bit more specific about particularly how you're handling extraction? Because these are very rounded, slippery texturally, and it's very, very lovely.
Yeah, so like I said, it's just being very careful about extraction, not letting my temperatures get too high. It's all natural fermented, temperature controlled ferments, in the sense that I use temperature to control my yeast because I don't inoculate. So we harvest. It takes a while to get that yeast population in the must so that we start fermenting, naturally, I guess after 3 days of cold soak or so. And that's just natural, 3 to 5 days. But I really, we're tasting every day. We're kind of making sure that the tannins and the extractions aren't too too much. And so we're pressing early. We're making sure, we're not using too vigorous of punch downs to extract, all that. We'll typically use, combo between foot tread and pump over and punch down to really try to make each ferment. And we break it down into like, 2 to 3 ton ferments. So we have about 40 of those every year. And we're only a 17-acre vineyard. So, I mean, we're really in typical Burgundy fashion, just kind of like spicing and really putting, the specific parcel in each tank. And I typically use some stem too, because if I'm extracting really light, the stem, some of my ferments have 100% whole cluster, where that will also kind of beef up the mid palate. If I'm, getting too careful, I can have like the stem tannin to kind of round things out.
It's let's take a look, because Frederick talked about by organic, and I know that, and every Jackson family property is full circle sustainable. I wanted just to look at a couple of things that you guys are doing here, and because what a lot of people I hear more and more people say is that by being as non-invasive and as naturally driven as possible in your farming, you're letting the terroir express, because then that's when all the biodiversity down to the soil microbes can kind of be what they're supposed to be. You guys are obviously committed to organic and biodynamic. What's your feeling about that? And it feels like obviously this is a baby terroir in terms of history, but is that part of the objective, or is it more just that it feels right, it's the right thing to do, or are you chasing terroir expression as well with the approach to farming, so organic and biodynamically?
Andrea, it's all the above, all what you said there. It's ultimately it's the soil that we're trying to replenish and nourish. And so with a healthy soil, with very living organisms in there, particularly the microorganisms and the fungus in the soil that helps with the mycelium and the roots of our vines. We're trying to create this community of vines where it's like it kind of operates, the vineyard operates as not it's a community of vines. We have older vines, younger vines that kind of help each other and be strong as a living entity. And so that will translate to less kind of manipulation in the vineyard, less and more balance, and thus more balanced, hopefully, fruit. And then after that we harvest it, and I just try to get out of the way and try to be as not hands off, but guiding it so that we're not over manipulating anything. It's really an expression of our farming, of our terroir, of the site. It'll be a pure Anderson Valley in the glass.
It is so delicious, and thank you for that. It's as I'm going back and smelling these 3 wines, and Greg, I know you'll agree with me. Like when you get a classic Pinot Noir as in a blind tasting, you're like, thank you, thank you, thank you. But then from there, it's like, how do you figure out where it's from? These are all so different, and in such a cool way, and everything's just. And it's evolving so much. So Darren, thank you for that. That's an amazing tour getting us to Anderson Valley. And I'm super excited not to leave, but to move on to another terroir, because we've got to keep our tour, but wonderful. Thank you for taking us there. And now we head further south yet again. Greg, I think we're going to another air-conditioned California Pinot Noir Valley.
Absolutely, and yeah, I would agree. That's really the beauty of Pinot Noir is when you can kind of sort out the differences between where it grows, and that kind of makes it a lifetime pursuit and a lifetime of interest, really, too. But yeah, as we head down the coast of California, so just south of Mendocino is Sonoma, separated from Napa by the Mayacamas. Sonoma is interesting in that, it grows a wide variety of grapes there. And so it's really about finding the right area for each variety. that makes it key. I mean, you know, certain areas focus on Zinfandel, up towards Alexander Valley and Knights Valley, you have a lot of Cabernet. But today we're talking Pinot Noir. The Russian River Valley is, you know, a specialist for Pinot Noir and also Chardonnay. But it's perhaps the most widely recognized AVA of the region, and definitely focuses with Pinot Noir. It has consistent nighttime fogs, large diurnal temperature shifts, and these Gold Ridge and Franciscan assemblage soils that are definitely key to the region. And here we have the Meredith Estate, the flagship of Mary Edwards, which sits in this cool southern sector of the Russian River Valley, and is sustainably and renewably farmed. And with that, I'll hand it back.
Fantastic. So we've got Heidi Vondermaiden, the winemaker who took over for Mary Edwards, a pioneer, a female woman winemaker pioneer for sure. I'll never forget the day at Windows on the World in New York City on top of the Trade Center when I got a phone call from one of the original co-founders saying, you need to meet Mary Edwards and taste her. This is the stuff. She is bringing it. So Heidi's filling some big shoes and also taking us to really one of our classic Pinot Noir regions. Greg, to your point, I loved how your Somm Geo also showed the River Valley. Maybe Heidi, we can start there and just talk about what that does for the Russian River in general. And then we can bring us to the Meredith Estate, which is yet again another completely different expression of Pinot Noir.
Thank you very much, Andrea. So the Russian River Valley is a really special place because we are so close to the ocean. Again, like a lot of these Pinot Noir regions are, especially in California. And the Meredith Estate Vineyard is really only about 10 miles from the Pacific Ocean. We have the Russian River flowing through the valley, of course. And the fog often goes right up. What's that?
It's an east-west orientation, roughly speaking, right? So it kind of...
Yeah, it sucks the fog in. So it really goes right up the valley and right up the river. And it's interesting because often the fog doesn't burn off here in the Russian River Valley until 11 o'clock in the morning, sometimes later. I remember in 2017, I was out trying to sample my grapes and I couldn't sample them in the ideal morning time because the grapes were so wet with dew. And I had to wait until noon to go out there to sample them so I could get an accurate expression of the grapes and accurate numbers. So it is a very special place. Meredith Estate is interesting because when Mary purchased the land, this was her first vineyard. She purchased it in '98. It was an abandoned apple orchard. And then she converted it to vineyard. And at that time, it actually was not included in the Russian River Valley. It wasn't until later when they expanded the Russian River Valley that it was included there. So originally it was a Sonoma Coast vineyard. And back at that time, Sonoma Coast didn't have the same accolades as it has now. So she really had a hard time getting traction with the name. And then once she put Russian River, was allowed to put Russian River on the label, suddenly it started gaining ground. So I guess that indicates to everybody that it's a Russian River Valley site, but it's also cooler. So it's cool in the mornings, the fog burns off. And then in the afternoons, we have these coastal breezes. Every afternoon, it's quite windy out there. So it stays pretty moderate throughout the growing season. And it allows our grapes to really sit out there, ripen, develop in texture, develop in complexity, and get a lot of phenolic content that many growing regions, many vineyard sites can't quite grab onto.
So you start out with that dew, but then you've got these winds whipping through that basically dry things off. So not that much disease pressure relative to maybe some areas that have more humidity. Is that pretty?
Very true.
Good.
Yeah.
Now take me into the glass because, and this is something that I always associate with this particular wine, which I think I've been able to taste most vintages ever made. Lucky me. But there's a real vividness and density to the color here that you still get the translucency and the transparency of Pinot Noir, but there's definitely more pigment. Tell me about that.
Yeah. So that's something that Mary always focused on. So I've continued that. I really focus on this wine's color. She always said the first thing you see when you pour a glass of wine is the color. And does it look yummy? Does it look like I want to drink it? And so she felt she wanted to have that really dark, intense color. And I'm trying to continue that. And luckily for us, Meredith, really, there's something about that site that really allows for really dark color. And so there's multiple blocks at the vineyard, and there are 2 blocks in particular that are planted to clones UCD 37, which is Mary's clone. That was a heritage clone that she actually took cuttings from Mount Eden. Wow. And brought it to Davis, had it heat treated, disease treated, and registered. So that's our clone. And it has very small berries and lots of the chicks and hens. So it gives, right there, you have a lot of phenolic content for those skins for the dark color. And then also 667 is planted there. And there's something about these 2 blocks. I don't know what it is in the soil or the aspect, because it's not that much different from the ones right next to it, but it always has really, really dark color. It's just, it's there.
Yeah. So tell me about the soil. You mentioned that, and Greg was talking about, and we've all heard these terms, the Gold Ridge and the Franciscan Assemblage. Can you tell us a little bit about, what does that mean? What's in there?
Okay, so we do have Gold Ridge soils. Let's see if I can get this right there. Get a little bit of a view of, this is actually soil that we grabbed a sample from at the Meredith Vineyard. So that is Gold Ridge soils. You can see it's really sand-like. It's really loamy. So these are very well-draining soils. It's a decomposed sandstone, and there's not a lot of nutrients in it. So that means you have well-draining soils. You can really, as a vineyard manager and a winemaker, do what you want in the vineyard as far as, oh, I want to increase the canopies. Well, you can add some compost for that. Or, oh, I want to, increase phenolic activity. Let's delay and do a lot more deficit irrigation to really control what kind of grapes you're getting. So it's really lovely soil for grapes.
Wow, so you really get to sort of play around, and I guess that gives you some flexibility to work with different vintage conditions. If you were to describe the style, like talk about the fruit profile, the taste that you're looking for.
Well, Meredith, it's 20 acres. The top part is usually what we would use for this vineyard designate, and the bottom part is usually a little bit less tannic, lighter phenolic content. And so we'll pick these 20 acres over a period of 2 to 3 weeks, because there's such a difference with the slope between the top and the bottom, whereas the top ripens 2 to 3 weeks sooner than the bottom. The fog really hangs in at the bottom down there. And I'm looking for really rich, dark tannins, but there's something that's very elegant about the Meredith tannins as well. So there's something silky, beautiful, and yet powerful. So when I'm tasting my wines, I'm looking for that phenolic content that is also powerful but rounded. And then the fruit profile is usually really, classic Russian River, dark berries, dark cherry fruit. So it's really a powerful wine.
And with extraction techniques, that's obviously something that we talk about a lot and people experiment with and or have a particular regimen. Are you doing any whole bunch? And what's your your temperatures, your time frames? How are you? Because you're obviously working that angle really, really hard.
Yeah, definitely. And it's funny because I'm listening to my colleagues here talk about some of the things they're doing that are a little bit more hands-off and delicate and trying to not get quite as much extraction. We're the opposite. This is legacy from Mary, and I love her wine, so I'm continuing her style. So I'm looking for warmer temperatures. So I'm looking for more extraction. We're doing 5 punch downs a day on our fermenters during the peak of fermentation. So and then we're also taking the samples to the lab during fermentation and testing for phenolic content to see how we're doing. How are we doing with extraction? Are we getting everything we can out of these grapes? Because that's our style. And sometimes I do have to back off. So I'm tasting every day, every fermenter, to make sure that I'm not going too far. And I might, stop the 5 times a day early, or press off a little bit earlier depending on the lot, but usually we're pushing the limits. I lost my train of thought.
No, that was great. It really, stylistically, it's so cool to have this different iteration. I was just thinking, good thing for mechanical tools these days, because otherwise that'd be a lot of jumping in and out of casks if you did it the old
my gosh, yes.
Either that or recruiting the kids. Well, thank you, Heidi. This is really, really delicious, and another great, totally different expression of Pinot Noir. And so thank you for that. And thanks for joining us. Greg, I'm going to take it back to you to bring us down to, well, our signature limestone deposit wine in North America, or at least one of the very few. Bring us down to, we're going to Mount Harlan now, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, Mount Harlan, head down through the Central Coast. One really interesting and unique thing with Mount Harlan is that, this is also an area where we're talking about elevation playing a major role. The vineyards go commonly up to 2,200 feet on the slopes of Mount Harlan. But a main cooling factor of this area is the Monterey Bay. This is really a rarity in that, very seldomly do you have such a deep water bay so close to the land. This one reaches 2 miles deep. So all of that water creates this giant kind of cold water mass that significantly cools the region. And when you're talking about Mount Harlan AVA, you're really talking about Calera and Josh Jensen, because this is one of the only monopole AVAs in America. And here we have the Ryan Vineyard, which really showcases the wines. And then the grapes, they're actually vinified at the Calera Winery, which is an entirely gravity flow operation that's really smartly built into the side of the hill to kind of give this gravity in the natural way. Here we have Ryan Vineyard in the late fall. And with that, I'll hand back to Andrea.
Fantastic. And so, yeah, that's the lore. And I remember this well as these wines were coming on the scene. Actually, I take that back, later than when they were coming on the scene, but they were a legend by the time I became a sommelier. But mid-70s, the famous Josh Jensen came back from working stages in Burgundy with famously Jacques Cess of Domaine du Jacques and some others, and came looking for limestone. So I'm going to hand it over to now the winemaker who was anointed by Josh to take over, Mike Waller, to talk to us about that, because clearly he was influenced by Burgundy and found this crazy spot, to your point, Greg, with the Gravity Flow Winery, which was formerly a rock crushing plant with a lime kiln, or calera in Spanish, used to process the limestone into things you make limestone out of. So Mike, take it away. Take us to this beautiful site. What's special about it?
Oh, thanks, Andrea. I think you and Andrea and Greg just covered everything I was going to say, so I think I'll just pass it on to the next person.
Not a chance, not a chance.
No. So as you saw on the map, Mount Harlan is located on a small mountain range, which separates Monterey County from San Benito County. So we're on the San Benito County side. Very small range, really runs from Monterey or from Hollister down through like King City. So it's on Monterey Bay. We are really smack dab in the center of California, central coast of California. Being up in that elevation along that Gamelin range is a big, stretch of limestone. And you see, go back, there's plenty of people that were actually harvesting this limestone back in the mid to late 1800s, and lime kilns all around there. And in fact, we have that one on the property where we got our name from, as you mentioned. But really, where we are situated, there was really nothing out there. Josh really spent, 2 years with his geologic maps running up and down the coast looking for limestone, because that's what his buddies in Burgundy said, right? And so in 1975, he finally found this spot, was able to buy it. I mean, it really was, it's out in the middle of nowhere, right? We have no electricity, running water, nothing like that. Not the normal amenities that most people have. And to this day, it's still that way. But he then planted 3 vineyards. He planted 3 Pinot vineyards where he can clear some spots. So our vineyards are very unique because they have very specific, very different exposures, very different kind of topsoils, but everything is planted around what you saw in that picture was this big cone of limestone. It's said to be about a 3 million ton deposit of limestone. So everything sits around that. A lot of the topsoils, especially with our Ryan vineyard, Ryan vineyard actually gets up to 2,500 feet there. But a lot of the topsoils there are more of a decomposed granite. So very really, really porous soils, really great drainage. Average rainfall for us is only about 15 inches a year. So that is a limiting factor for us. And when we talk about the treacheries, I think, of planting in places like this, and you're only getting 15 inches of rain, and really people are looking to get a crop, right? Our average yield these days is about 1 ton to 1.5 tons to the acre. So very low yields up there. I think, with all these different exposures, though, really have focused on these individual vineyards. And I think at the time, in the 1970s and early 1980s, there weren't a lot of Pinot producers that were making Pinots in that style, like thinking about very specific sites. So site specific. Josh learned early on, he got his world from Burgundy, right? And I think he kind of wanted to emulate just the style and the thought of actually focusing in on these individual sites. And for us, it's broken down into now 6 single vineyard Pinots. But when he went out to try to sell these wines back in the 80s, he was trying to sell 3-4 different Pinots. They said, "Why are you doing that?" It was tough to sell in America a Pinot with very site specific, rather than being an estate versus a reserve or something like that. But he stuck to his guns, and I think it was good because all of these sites are very, very unique. I mean, they all have this taste of Mount Harlan, but they all have very unique, uniqueness to each of the wines. So
as I jump into the glass, I mean, I'm getting this really pretty floral expression, and then maybe I'm just, it's power of suggestion, but I'm really also getting this kind of chalky grip in the mid palate. It's very subtle. It's like it grabs on, then it immediately lets go. But is that something that is typical to Ryan, or is it something that runs throughout the stable? And what are some specific characteristics for Ryan?
Yeah, I mean, again, I like what Eric said earlier. It's, we're winemakers. We're not really thinking about what fruit is there. I mean, definitely probably in the past, I'd say more red fruit. But I mean, I think that varies from year to year, vintage to vintage. Really, for me, it's just getting this fruit ripe enough, because we have the phenolics, we have the structure to create this tension in these wines. They all have a similar tension that runs along them. I think the older vineyards, the ones that were planted in 75 have softer, more subtle phenolics, tannins. The Ryan tends to have a little bit more grippiness right now.
How are you, talk about vinification a little bit. Obviously we know gravity flow, but how are you handling extraction, especially with these tiny yields that you have?
Yeah, I mean, this is, and Darren was saying it earlier, that we're really kind of hands off, but I think we truly are. I mean, I think Josh learned how to make wine in the early 70s in Burgundy before we had great destemmers and we had all this stuff. So he brought that back and really kind of ran with it. So we've always been 100% whole cluster. We've always been native yeast. So basically we bring the grapes in, we throw them in a tank and we let them go. 2 weeks later, we press them off, put them in barrel for 15 to 18 months, rack them one time and bottle them. That's pretty much it.
That's pretty amazing. So that's a great point too. I've heard people say that the whole discussion about whole bunches, it's very much a modern phenomenon, especially when you talk to the Jacques Cess generation and then kind of the next one down. It's like, we didn't have destemmers. So,
Yeah.
It wasn't a thing. Now it's a thing to make.
I think the important thing to think about though, because we talk about this and I think it becomes like a fad. Everybody's like, how much whole cluster do you use? Well, we've always used whole cluster. I think that there's a lot of things that run into this though. I also make some Central Coast wines.
Right.
Some of these vineyards do not handle whole cluster. They tend to be more veggie. I think being up in that higher elevation, we have great exposure. We have very long hang times. I mean, I might be picking my first Pinot in the beginning of September and not finished till the end of October. So you see a big range of things there. But I have also, we have what they call the Calera clone, which is a Calera selection. But I think these clusters aren't as dense as maybe a lot of the Dijon clones are. So they have a little bit more exposure through the rachis, and being up in that higher elevation, we definitely have like more great sun exposure. But we do have those diurnal shifts too. So being up there and
Right.
have the Monterey Bay cooling us off. So
Exactly, to Greg's point, and then that can't be underestimated. I always joke to people, like, remember that, going to the beach in California, you're going to put on a parka unless you're, in Malibu, and then you're still probably going to put on a, a wetsuit or whatever. But, and it's so cold because, Greg, as you said, it's so deep. And so it's a real different thing from thinking about, the Côte d'Azur in France or whatever. But fantastic wine and a super cool story. And our only other monopole, right, at some level on the panel. So kind of neat. Mike, thank you for this. And thank you for taking up the mantle of a legendary producer, no doubt about it. We're going to move on. Greg, you're going to take us down to the Santa Rita Hills appellation. We are just cooking along.
Absolutely. So yeah, headed making our way down the Central Coast. Santa Barbara is really an area that it can kind of do it all, but what it does very well really depends on pairing up the variety with the area. Largely, you have Pinot Noir and Chardonnay really making a home in the Santa Rita Hills, where you have a ton of fog, cool temperatures. Rhone varieties towards the center in like Ballard Canyon, they do really well there. And then Bordeaux varieties taking up Happy Canyon over to the east. Local lore here, and it's actually truth as well, more or less, is that for every mile that you go in from the Pacific Ocean, the temperature raises 1 degree. And the region also has this huge diversity of soils. Now, I understand geology like a sommelier, not like a geologist, but more or less the plates have shifted over the years and have basically churned up everything that's underneath. And so you get a huge change in soils, even sometimes just between some of the one vineyard to another. And here we have, with this valley going east to west, we have the Lloyd Cellars Pinot Noir. We have grapes for this coming from 2 really great sources. That's the La Nina vineyard and the Rio Vista vineyard. And with that, I'll hand it back. I'm excited to check these out.
Sorry, the dog was barking, and so I thought I wouldn't share that part of the Napa Valley scene with you. But anyway, this is really a very cool, another example of an East-West vineyard orientation. We're going to talk to Rob Lloyd of Lloyd Cellars here. And I am so fascinated by the soil description here because it's a diatomaceous earth, diatoms that are ancient algae, and they're carapaces that were deposited hundreds of millions, I think, of years ago. I think of DE, diatomaceous earth, as a filter medium. I didn't know we grew grapes in it as well. So Rob, take us to the site and talk about this. And you also said a descriptor for your wine, and I'm getting totally that description in there, but I'm gonna let you do the reveal. Welcome.
Well, thanks for having me. Very happy to be here. I'm having a lot of fun listening to everybody else. and just all the different styles. And this is what makes Pinot so fun. But with the site, with the DE, the boots don't lie. When I'm out in the vineyard, I'll be walking around in black boots, and I hop back in the car and they are white. So just a ton of powdery soil. And the fun thing for me is getting two sites there. One of our sites is a little bit, I guess, being a California kid, you come off the 246, past the 101, heading over towards the 1. And when you're more inland, Rio Vista tends to get a little bit warmer, just as was described earlier. And then we're about 2 miles away for La Viña. And so with the ripening for those two vineyards, totally different. The soils are a little different. We'll harvest normally about a week apart. And La Viña that will come in a week later will tend to be about 2 bricks less. So it's a lot of fun. I've worked with a lot of different vineyards in different areas over my career, but Santa Rita Hills for us, when we came out with our first Lloyd Pinot, was the one that we wanted to go with.
It's a really beautiful expression. This is this along with the Meredith Estate for Mary Edwards is it going a little bit more in the direction of the darker rather than red fruits, more of the blacker fruits, a little bit more lusty, dusky. And you used a descriptor that my husband and I like to joke about from time to time because it gets used a lot, but it's interesting. What do we mean by the word bramble? So talk to us about the particular taste profile that we're talking about here. You said brambly spice.
Yeah, I don't even know if brambly is a real word, but it's that spice component, and it's that kind of spicy with a little bit of earth is how I always describe the brambly. If we're going in different winemaking camps, I'd say Heidi and I should be hanging out. We definitely like getting a lot of extraction, a lot of color. I've been making a lot of different wines over the years, a lot of Chardonnay. We're kind of known for making a big Chard, and so I needed to have a big Pinot, and if you're tasting it,
So speaking of extraction, you have a particular approach that you're taking to cap management, where everybody, just to reorient people, you've got the fermentation tank and all of the solids, the cap with the skins and the seeds and the solids are basically floating to the top, but that's where all the phenolics are. And as your mother would say, don't peel the apple, eat the skin, because the good stuff's under the skin. So more than just phenolics, but you also have some risks when your cap's exposed to volatile acidity and attacks of microbes. So you've got a particular way of managing that. Tell us about that.
So yeah, years ago we developed the open top fermenters with what's I guess called a submerged cap device, and it basically acts kind of like a French press. So once we'll get the fermentation going, we'll do French délestage or rack and return, and we'll basically use gravity to take the juice out. We'll lock this submerged cap in, kind of the French press, and we'll put the liquid back on top. And so rather than basically me having to jump in and mix it or punch it down, we use what the yeast are naturally generating, the CO2, to constantly kind of mix the wine. And then we'll just do once a day rack and returns to be able to get that oxygen in to keep the fermentation nice, healthy, and active. And the neat thing is also with the Rio Vista vineyard, it does tend to take a little bit higher bricks to get it right. And so by doing this submerged cap device, using this, it allows us to be able to control the alcohol also, because depending on the length of the ferment, we can lose up to basically 2% ethanol out of those ferments. So it's just kind of another fun tool. And this is why I fell in love with winemaking. Where you grow the grapes, what bricks do you pick at? Do you destem, do you not destem? And we do destem. But all these different things and how you make it: closed top, open top, submerged cap, fermenting in barrels, just an endless different spice rack to cook with.
Yeah. So when that surfboard breaks, you can use that to kind of punch down. Just kidding. So you talked about, you said you're destemming. Then the slide that I showed mentioned reduced use of sulfur. I've heard a lot of people say, and the slide also mentioned that Pinot Noir likes to ferment really quickly. So what are you doing to control that And are your overall ferments shorter and you're trying to stretch them out? How does that work?
You know, it depends on the year. You know, with the 2018 that we're drinking, you know, we picked out a little bit lower bricks, and so the ferments, I always want the ferments to go basically as long as they can. I like them a little bit slower. You know, just getting that skin contact, you're able to absorb more out of there. You know, with the 18 and with a lot of the wines, we tend to press off at about 1 to 2 bricks, and I like to have the wine go into barrel to finish out, just really feeling like I love yeast. They're just amazing little douse scrubbing bubbles. And so by putting them into the barrel and having the wine finish in barrel, it really helps to kind of integrate the oak with the wine.
Right, because they say that that yeast helps to sort of metabolize some of the oak lactones that are being contributed, so it gets them integrated more. And is that also a little bit more of a reductive environment, so you have to use less sulfur because you're kind of protecting the wine? Is that right?
Yeah, you know, and I'm not a huge, you know, I'm not a huge sulfur dioxide fan. I mean, it is a great tool. We definitely will use it, but you know, especially when you're going into barrels, you know, the great thing about barrels are semi-permeable membranes. You're getting that micro oxygenation. Or if you add in something that basically absorbs oxygen, you're somewhat defeating the purpose. So we'll use temperature to control. So we will go into the barrels to finish out the ferment. We do a small amount of inoculation for the secondary ferment. And then we use room temperature to control that, so that we want to struggle out that primary, struggle out that secondary, so that we naturally generate that CO2, which is the natural preservative, so that we don't have to add in that sulfur, so that you know, we are able to get that really good micro-oxidation in the barrel for as long as we can.
Wow, super fascinating. So when you're tasting the 2 separate vineyards, is the fruit taste different? And I know, and this is very typical of my Napa Valley neighbor Cabernet makers, I can't ever get them to talk about what the wine tastes like. And especially, Eric, to your point about the fruit, because they're like, as long as the fruit's tasty, I don't care if it's red or black or in between. I want the texture and the aromas, and I get that. But do these taste different? Like if you're sampling the grapes, is one like clearly darker and redder and the other one redder, or is it vintage dependent?
They're always very different. And I describe Lavinia as feminine and Rio Vista as masculine. And a lot of times, you know, you kind of put those two together and you can make one great wine. So they always are very different between the two of them. And we've sometimes we'll bottle the Lavinia separate, but I really like how they kind of come together and complement each other.
Yeah. So as the going back to site for a second, and we obviously have the 2 separate vineyards, but do you think that like, have you ever tasted another wine from similar soils, diatomaceous or soils? Do you think that that's having a contribution? I know these are sort of more alkaline soils, which would take you more towards the family of limestone, but do you think that's having an effect here?
You know, I've been curious that myself for years. Personally, I think it has more to do with Lavinia being closer to the ocean, that it's going to be a little bit cooler, that we're retaining those acids a little bit more. But I mean, this is, again, the fun thing about wine. You know, you can keep learning, and the only way you keep learning is by keep making and keep drinking the wine. And when you had asked before, kind of, you know, we've had, you know, Eric, you know, talked about, you know, textures. I always kind of think of, you know, I want our Pinot to pass the bottle test. And, you know, if you and your husband open that up, you know, does it go down so smooth and easy that you want to open up that second bottle?
Yes. Thanks to Joel Quigley on your team for sending me number 2. Because
just in case. It's good, just in case.
Exactly. So Rob, thank you. Really, really cool, interesting story. Very, very unique. Another whole different site. And that's why we're here. God bless Pinot Noir and the people who will go through the pain and suffering to bring it to us in all these different iterations. And so speaking of site and all the different things we've been talking about in terms of down to the specificity of blocks, we're going to move down to New Zealand, where they're no less obsessive about keeping things separate, unique, and optimizing every little slice of heaven. So Greg, take us down to Marlborough, not Central Otago, which is known for Pinot Noir as well, but take us to Marlborough.
Absolutely. Yeah, around the world we go, down to New Zealand, where Duncan's going the extra mile and starting the webinar at 4 in the morning. So thank you for that. And also home to really tremendous mountains that create these valleys with alluvial soils as the glaciers and the waters worn down the earth over its history. At the northern end of the South Island, bordering the Cook Strait, which is a cold, bumpy ride if you ever have a chance to cross it. You have Marlborough, definitely probably the most well-known New Zealand wine region. Most of it is between the Richmond Range and the Kaikoura Ranges, since the Wairau Valley is really that kind of center of production. But when you think of Marlborough, you know, Sauvignon Blanc is really what most often comes to mind. But I think the Pinot Noir that's coming out of the area is really some of the most exciting wines, even if you don't see them quite as commonly. And the southern valleys here are a really important subzone for the grape. The soils here, they have a little bit heavier clay that when combined with the climate work out really well for Pinot Noir. Headed down, we have the Claven Vineyard. This is where Gießen Wines have done a lot of work to really understand the area and understand how to best dial in the vineyards and minimize the impact. And this, we have the Geyer Crawler. This is a custom piece that weighs less, minimizes the soil compaction and overall stress. And I think is a really creative way to kind of be better for the environment. And I'm going to take it away from here.
Greg, that's fantastic. Thank you. And I hope everybody saw, it's such a great tool, this the Somm Geo, that you saw that that's along a strip, and there's a lot of difference between the exposure to the ocean. But here's the first time, Duncan, that we're talking about really more of a maritime climate. And I will say that, so that's an important aspect. You'll explain that to us. But truly, the nature of this country is literally sacred. And I think that Claven and Gießen are doing, Gießen with the Claven Vineyard and the wines are doing a lot to bring that to the fore. So Duncan Schuler, thank you. It's now 5:30 in the morning for you. Hope the espresso was strong. Take us to the homeland and talk to us about this beautiful site.
Good morning, Andrew, and it's been a pleasure to sit here for the last hour and a half and watch these presentations. It is early in the morning, but if you're going to be up at this time of night, then you want to be talking about Pinot. It's fantastic. As Greg sort of really nicely illustrated there, of course, Marlborough is a very big region, most famously known for Sauvignon Blanc, and the largest growing area within Marlborough is the Wairau Valley. Now, the Wairau Valley is a valley carved out by the Wairau River, and that's where those famous riverbed soils exist on the valley floor where Sauvignon Blanc grows so well. Now, what I love about Claven, it's the story of Pinot Noir, where it is now in Marlborough and where it's gone over the last 30 years and how it's evolved. In 1991, a guy called Mike Eaton decided to take a big risk. He was a bit of a game changer, and he bought a small block of land in the Southern Valleys on some clay soil. And decided to plant a Pinot Noir vineyard with Chardonnay and Syrah as well that was quite different to anything else happening in Marlborough at the time. He was going for close planting, he was going for varieties that were not common in the region at the time, and he planted a very, very complex vineyard. What he was wanting to do was express a site that he felt was very special. Nobody else was planting in that region at the stage. Everyone was putting Sauvignon Blanc on the valley floor. So he wanted to create something that was more Burgundian in style, close planted, 5,500 vines per hectare, low trained, and lots and lots of different clones and rootstocks, predominantly to try and express this site that he'd found. So that's what he's done. I think that, Andrew, you've got an image there of the vineyard in terms of its breakdown and its complexity. It's a really interesting image for us to have a look at. What he's got here is, that's a beautiful image of Claven itself. It's sort of on the southern valleys, so north facing, gentle slope. And you can see at the bottom there, you can see a little thread of fog. That's the Wairau River. So that's that maritime influence coming in. Of course, that's got a cooling influence on the region. Marlborough is very much inherently a cool climate, cool at night and slightly warm during the day, but inherently very cool. that maritime influence is certainly having an impact on the whole valley. I mean, even up at Clavin, it has an influence as well. So here you can see Clavin Vineyard sort of as it slopes down from the Southern Valley Hills. It's a very densely clay vineyard. So the soil here is predominantly clay. There's really not a lot else. You have to go quite a long way down before you start finding some gravel and some silty loam. But it's a stunning vineyard. So, like I said, at the time, most people in Marlborough were planting relatively simple vineyards on the valley floor that were designed for machine harvesting and Sauvignon Blanc. What Mike was doing was planting a really complex vineyard. The site itself is very, very complex. The site is rolling. There are several clay fans that feed through the vineyard itself. And we have many, many different clones and rootstocks. What he was trying to do is create a site that allowed the winemakers 10, 20, 30 years later to express the vineyard site more than the clone or just the variety. And he's done that really successfully. So what we try and do at Clavin is we've separated this 13-hectare vineyard into several individual blocks. When I say several, you can probably see on this diagram now that there are many, many different variations in the site. And if you look at it closely, sorry, Andrew.
I said just a couple.
Yeah. Yeah, so what you're looking at there is a vineyard that's separated by strips of 2 or 3 rows that are a separate clone or rootstock, all within little sub-blocks of the same vineyard. What that allows us to do is when we come to the vineyard to harvest, we can, as much as possible, allow the blocks, the sub-blocks, to do the talking and not the clones. It's a complex vineyard to make wine from and certainly to harvest, but we try and take the complexity out by picking large components of the block at a time. So of course, what that means is we're picking several clones together, several rootstocks together, and hopefully we're creating a wine that's expressing that sub-block rather than the clone itself. And I think that was Mike's vision in 1991 when he planted the site. He certainly wasn't thinking about efficiency or about making a vineyard that was easy to grow fruit on or to make harvesting decisions. He was thinking about the site and trying to express it.
Do you have to hand harvest these Pinot Noir grapes?
Yeah, absolutely, Andrew. So it's all hand harvested. Everything basically is done by hand on the vineyard. As Greg rightly pointed out, we do have a guyer, which is fantastic. Allows us to do some of the work mechanically, but still very delicately on the soil at the same time. But certainly as we approach vintage, and this would be a great example of 2021, you have to spend a huge amount of time at this vineyard to get a feel for the different clones, how everything is progressing, what clones look good this year, what clones are behind. 2021, we had a lot of uneven ripening, so we really had to walk pretty much every row in the vineyard to get a feel for what we would harvest together. To avoid just harvesting one clone on one day. We're trying to sort of get several clones together in a fermenter. So everything's done by hand. What I really love about Clavin is that soil profile for me is really what sort of establishes the style of the wine. And as people have mentioned before, it is really about that soil profile that's driving the texture of the wine. And for me, the texture of the wine is the key here. Not far from Clavin Vineyard, we've got another vineyard called Ridge, which is a more gravelly profile soil, gravelly and sort of silty loam. And you tend to get a more gravelly tannin. You go to Clavin and it's very dense clay soil, and you tend to get this silky clay sort of character through the mid palate. And it's more dense, like the soil. I love to make that comparison because it's literally like you're tasting the soil in your palate. It's such a direct relationship.
Density, and it's funny that you say clay, because I've talked to geologists who are focused on wine soils, and they literally have to put the dirt in their mouth to see if it's clay versus silt because of how the texture comes through. And this is totally clay in the sense that there's no grit, but you still get weight and density, like pottery clay, like it's just gonna stick to your palate, and then it whispers away. Talk about vinification. We have just a couple minutes left, so talk about vinification, what you're doing with, again, extraction, because that's a big thing for us to share on, since we have all the greatest winemakers for Pinot Noir in the world, or at least a lot of them here.
Look, absolutely, and I think that so the two things we're looking for with vinification are simplicity, so allowing the vineyard to do the talking, And then also minimalist extraction. We don't want to extract too much. The vineyard gives us a lot of natural color and tannin. So it's really just holding back and sort of letting the vineyard do the talking without pushing it too far. We inoculate with a pied de cuve. That's probably one of the most important things we do. A couple of days before we harvest, we'll start a tiny little micro ferment in the vineyard with some bunches of grapes and some flowers and some leaves from the vineyard to try and propagate the natural clavin yeast. Once we've harvested, after about 4 or 5 days of cold soak, we'll bring that little micro ferment back to the winery and inoculate with that. So that's where we're trying to allow the vineyard's microflora to express themselves in the wine as well. After that, it's very, very simple. Probably 1 punch down a day, maybe 2 maximum at the start. Turn the temperature down a little bit as we go below 10 brix to avoid too much extraction towards the back end of ferment. Maybe 2 weeks on skins post ferment, and then rack it off and go to the barrel. Very simple winemaking, and hopefully allows us to express the site as best as we can.
So that's really cool. So to explain the pied de cuve, it's where you're taking basically you're taking some tissue like grapes, but also you mentioned flowers and leaves from the vineyard, and they've got the native yeast on them, and so you're starting a little, smushing that up, starting a little mini ferment, and then letting the yeast population build up that way. So instead of inoculating with a commercial yeast, you're able to use the natural yeast population, which is a bunch of them, right? A bunch of different ones, to get your whole fermentation going. But you do it in a way that the yeast are happy and healthy and active, so they can kind of control the vat and everything goes smoothly. That's basically how it works?
It is, that's exactly right. So I mean, essentially what we're trying to do is, I mean, we literally go out to the vineyard. Our winemaker goes out with sterile gloves, uses a sterile fermenter. We really want to just capture the yeast that are present in the vineyard. Then it can be quite risky, because what you can do is propagate over 5 days. You can propagate Brettanomyces or Acetobacter. So you've got to be a little bit careful that you don't do that. But if you have the right temperature and a very sterile environment, then you're encouraging just those natural yeasts to populate. And that, I think, is what gives the wine some of its characteristic. To me, it always has a floral note, which I think is coming from the pied de cuve, and it's a mark of the Pinot Noir.
Yeah. Yeah, very much like roses, but the rose that has opened and started to wilt, so it has much more of a heady expression rather than the tight closed rose from the first delivery, and it doesn't smell like anything yet. This is really beautifully expressive. Well, Duncan, I mean, I'd say you got to learn a lot and share a lot or hear a lot from a lot of your colleagues, but you sure had to pay a price to do it. But we are the beneficiaries of being able to end up on this great wine and to have tried all of these fantastic wines. And I think we are really at time. So I'm going to hand it back over to Lars after saying to everyone, wow, thank you so much. This has just been an amazing experience. And Greg, Somm Foundation, Somm Geo, what a cool thing. Let's do this every week. I wish this were my only job. And I'm sure all of you do too. But I'm going to hand it back over to Lars. Thank you, everybody. This has been fantastic. And you're why we're here. You winemakers really make us proud and give us a reason to be. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Andrea. And wow on your part too. Very well done. You know, in my 3 decades of experience working, I love winemakers. I love talking to them, but I often find that winemakers are just like IT guys and chefs. They would much rather be behind the scenes, but you did a masterful job in really charming them, pulling them out, getting them to tell some of their deep, dark secrets. And it was fantastic. So thank you for that, Andrea. Thank you to all the winemakers. Thank you, Greg, for that phenomenal tool, which I think one of the comments came in a little earlier, that it's really changing the face. It's a game changer for wine education. So thank you for that. Thank you, Lynn, Somm Foundation. Keep your eye out, all members of the Somm Foundation. You'll be getting your email with your essay theme soon. And enjoy. Good luck to all of you. And I don't know if luck is what it takes or skill, whatever it is, but best wishes in that. And again, thank you, Meredith, Somm Journal, and Nat Geo for the New Sotheby's Wine Encyclopedia. And thank you all for tuning in and your patience and your time. Most of our audience stuck with us, so we appreciate that very much. And we'll see you next time. Thank you, folks. Good night.
See you next time. Bye from Napa.
Bye, thank you.